Hello, everyone, and welcome to another PBBI from event, the Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute from California State University, Fresno. This one in collaboration with PALCUS, the Portuguese-American Leadership Council of the United States, and in collaboration with four different authors that we are so pleased to have here. Welcome to those of you following us here on Zoom. Welcome to those of you following us the students following us on Canvas, and welcome to all of those who are following us out in the social media networks, and thanks to all the different groups that always are kind enough to allow us to latch on, and that way we're able to reach, of course, quite a few more people throughout I would say, the Portuguese diaspora, not just in the United States, but certainly in Canada as well, and even in Bermuda and some other folks in some other parts of the world. We always have a good audience, believe it or not, even though it's this late at night in the Azores and sometimes in mainland Portugal. There's always a few people that probably are coming home from the bar. I'm just joking. And actually, this is the time to go to the bar in Portugal. It's midnight. That join us, and we appreciate that. I'm glad to have all of these four women with us. They are authors and of a particular literature. This is in the United States National Children's Literature Week, one of 2 weeks. There is this one in May and then another one in November that the U.S. dedicates to children's literature, and maybe actually should be more like 4 a year, because children's literature is so important, not only to children, but to parents and to society in general. It gives parents a way sometimes to answer questions that are hard for us to answer, or not even hard for us to answer, but sometimes we don't have the time. It's been a while since, I mean, you're always a parent until you die, but mine are a bit older. I have seen it with my grandchildren, and I have seen it with my friends' children as well. So, and that's something that we have been lacking, unfortunately, and I say that with a capital U, unfortunately, in the Portuguese-American and Portuguese-Canadian world. But thanks to these four authors, we now have a good body of works, and hopefully just the beginning of a lot more in children's literature. So thanks to Angela Simões, Andrea Nunes, Patricia Ferreira, Lopez, and Julia Costa Langley for joining us. I appreciate your time, certainly appreciate your talent, and thanks for putting these themes out to reach youngsters in the Portuguese-American community, the Portuguese-Canadian community, but indeed children's literature, even if it deals with something that's very Portuguese, it is really international and it is multicultural. And now we have, in California in particular, every single year, teachers are always looking for material in English about the Portuguese for children, because we have these multicultural weeks. And I recall when I was teaching at the secondary level and had friends of mine in the elementary level in the second and third grades, and they couldn't find anything. It's just, nothing was there. Everything was in Portuguese that came from Portugal. So thanks for exploring these themes and putting your work out there. I'm going to start by asking each one of our invitees to take about 3, 4, 5 minutes and give us a brief bio. I could read a brief bio by each one, but it's always best when we talk about ourselves and fill in the blanks that a simple bio to be published somewhere usually doesn't have. So I'll start with Andrea. She's kind of, as we would say it in if we were playing Jeopardy, she's a returning champion. She's been she's participated in a couple of our projects before, and we thank her for doing that. And so, Andrea, we'll start with a brief bio from you, please.
All right. Well, good night, everyone. Good evening. So I am Andrea Nunes. I am based out of New Jersey. I was born and raised here. I was actually raised in the Elizabeth, New Jersey community. So a big Portuguese population there, right next to Newark, another big Portuguese population. So I really grew up in the culture, not just within the home, but also with neighbors and with the clubs and the nonprofits and organizations that were local. My parents were both immigrants, so my mother and father are both from the same aldeia in Portugal, Vila Soeiro do Chão. It's actually part of the Serra da Estrela region. And so my mother came here very young. She was raised here, learned the English language. My father came here later. So he was an adult, he had to learn the language. But because of that, Portuguese was my first language. They were speaking Portuguese to each other. My grandmother here spoke Portuguese. So that's what I learned first. And then I had to learn English, obviously, to start school. But the language was always around. And with that, because I had another set of grandparents and a ton of family still in Portugal, I spent a lot of my summers visiting Portugal. And so I have these childhood memories that it's really the simple things in life, right? It's just a day with grandma and grandpa there, and you kind of get exposed to the experience in Portugal, and in a smaller village, which was where my family was from. And I loved it. It was so different than life, day-to-day life here. And I always cherish those memories. So when I wasn't in Portugal, obviously throughout the year, I was usually involved within the community, whether it be nonprofits or the Elizabeth Portugal Day Parade. So I always tried to stay close. And then I've really carried it forward. So now having two daughters of my own, it is really important for me to keep the culture going and hopefully also have them learn the language just to communicate with our family that still speaks it. So
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you so much for. We'll talk a little bit about your books and how you incorporated a few words, which I thought was lovely the first time when we talked about your experience with children's literature. So we'll turn to Patricia Ferreira Lopez in a little bit about again 45 minutes, a brief bio, if you would, please.
Sure. So like Andrea, I also grew up in a Portuguese speaking family. I was born in Portugal in Serra da Estrela, coincidentally, in Covilhã. And we immigrated to Canada when I was around 5 years old. And every other summer we would be sent to Portugal in the same way, and I'm the little girl who, although to my grandmother's horror, would be kissing the cobblestones before I left because I just loved my little village. My grandmother was, my grandparents, my maternal grandparents were in Turzendo, which is very close to Covilhã, and my father's family is from Relvas, from the area of Relvas. And so our culture was very thick in our home, and the music and the arts, literature was something that we were exposed to from a very young age, and keeping the language up was incredibly important to us, and something that has stayed with me. Everything that ever has come from Portugal, it's almost like a special treasure growing up as a child, because it was sacred somehow. And I listened to Andrew speaking, and I was thinking about how when you would come back, it's just not the same. There's something almost, and it was just common everyday things of spending those times with grandparents and with relatives and exploring and going to the local cafe and spending time together. But it's just something so magical about that that's hard to put into words. And it only came kind of to light through writing this children's book. So I live in Canada, near Toronto, Ontario, and Bowmanville, Ontario. And I too am trying to pass this on to my daughter. My husband is Mexican, so we have a Mexiquese Canadian daughter. And so she gets a little bit of the best of both worlds, with the Mexican culture and the Portuguese culture, and learning Spanish and Portuguese together. So that's a little bit about me.
Thank you, Patricia, and she's very lucky because those two cultures have a lot in common, as you know, and as I know, with here at Fresno State, the majority of our students who take Portuguese, we have 47 this semester. I have 47 students, and about 72% are Mexican immigrants or sons or daughters of Mexican immigrants who know Spanish fluently and are becoming trilingual. Which is because it's kind of a natural or kind of brother and sister language kind of situation. So she's very, very lucky. Julie, Costa Langley, a little bit the same thing. 45 minutes if you can. A brief bio.
Costa Langley. I was born and raised in Santa Cruz, California. I was raised in a very close-knit Portuguese family. My mother is from Terceira. She was born and raised there, and she met my father. My father was also born here in California in the Central Valley in a little small town called Winton, California. And when he was in the military during the Korean War, he was stationed at the American military base in Lodges. And that's how he met my mom. It so happened that my mother's stepfather was a cousin of his mother's. And he met her one day with another cousin of his, and it was love at first sight. They got married back in 1955. And my mother immigrated to America with my father in 1957. My father's parents were also from Terceira. My grandmother was from Algualva, and my grandfather was from Fontinhas. It took 15 years for her to go back. But I still remember that day. I was 5 years old, and from that time on, I just fell in love with the island. It's just, I'm not from there, but my heart is in Terceira. Right now, I'm living in Santa Cruz. I'm looking forward to going back this summer. My world has been, I grew up with my mother singing in the kitchen with the radio, with Shivj on the radio. It's just part of who I am. And I'm I'm very humbled to be here today with all of you.
We're happy to have you here. Thank you, Julie and Angela Costa Simões. So we've saved the home person for last, because Angela is part of the PALCUS team, and she is all of you know, she's a promoter, of course, of everything that's Portuguese. The world would not be the same, or the Portuguese world in California and the United States, without Angela Costa Simões. And certainly my world would probably be a lot calmer, because she makes me, she incites me into different projects within the Portuguese-American culture. But she's a great asset. But I'll let her talk about herself.
Thanks, Denise. So I am third generation Portuguese-American. My great grandparents are the ones who immigrated on both sides. My dad's family is from Ferreira, and then my mom's family is from Guarda. And I've been to both. I've met some very, very distant cousins, and but the first time I actually went to Portugal, I was 21. So I did not have the childhood experiences of going to Portugal, and we didn't speak Portuguese in our home growing up. However, we were still very involved in the Portuguese community. I think, dressed up as an angel on a float before I could walk, along with all my cousins. And so grew up very much with the love of the culture and knowing it was who we were, and sopas and linguiça and sweet rice and things like that. Unfortunately, the language component was not a very strong component growing up. When I married my husband, who is also Portuguese, he's first generation, so his parents are from Lisbon. We agreed even before we had kids that we would want our kids to learn Portuguese. And so when our daughter was born, she, I looked for books in Portuguese, kids' books in Portuguese, and then, we brought some from Portugal and things like that. But not being fluent, it was a kid's book. I thought, oh, it can't be that hard. Yeah, I couldn't understand a kid's book. And so it was really hard for me to kind of help with the learning of Portuguese with our daughter, because I couldn't even read a kid's book. And it just dawned on me that, well, what if it was in both English and Portuguese, and then I could learn and figure it out and then help her learn as well. So I looked for some books online that were bilingual, and I just really wasn't finding anything. There were a couple, most of them seemed like they were Brazilian, but they also were just kind of like, like Snow White translated into Portuguese. It wasn't anything that was deliberately written for the Portuguese experience or the Portuguese community. And I, just having a new baby girl, I was inspired to write Linda Menina, and literally was just about, when we went to wake her up in the morning and what that was like and all the lovely things that we would say to her. And then all of a sudden, all the boy moms said, well, what about boys, a book for boys. And so we just did a Linda Menina version. And then, you know, how things go, you think, I wonder if I could also write another one and another one. And before you know it, we've got 5 books under my belt now. So with a long list of others that I want to write, really with the goal of capturing a couple things. One, capturing our experience as the Portuguese diaspora, because we have continued with lots of traditions that our ancestors brought over from the old country, right? The festas that we have, the folklore, the bands, lots of things that we still, you know, hold dear to us, and it's what makes our community our community. But then also things like the legend of the Barcelos rooster that has just sort of been an oral tradition, right? There was nothing really written for kids. And there's lots of things like that. So like, you know, the story of the Manjerico, or the story of Rainha Santa Isabel. So there's lots of stories that could be captured. And so I think there's a lot of potential there for authors to capture things that are pretty specific to our community, and not just you know, kind of generic. The generic is not in a bad term, not in a bad way, but just like kind of like a random, you know, 2 dogs walking down the street kind of story. So anyway, so that's where
Thank you, Angela. And when I was listening to both Andrea and Patricia, I'm reminiscent of the how lucky both of them were in the aspect that they were able to spend summers, you know, with their grandparents or their family in Portugal. That's such a rich tradition that the Portuguese from mainland Portugal have, that unfortunately Azorians don't, which is sending their kids, sometimes not even going, or going and then leaving them behind the extra summer months. I was raised with, or through my career especially, with in the Portuguese Language Teacher Association, that many of my colleagues did that, and it's a tradition. Although the Azores are closer to the United States and to Canada, there's not that tradition, unfortunately, because that is the actual only way for the language to be alive. Because if you have to, even if you don't speak much when you're there, if you're 3 months out of the year, or even 2 months out of the year, or 6 weeks out of the year, with your grandparents or with other family members in Portugal, every single year, the language is going to be second nature. And so in California, not just in California, but also those who are of Azorian ancestry, whether it be in Massachusetts or in Ontario or Quebec, unfortunately, we don't have that tradition. That's something that we should have learned and should have invested, because it was our language situation is not the same, although it seems like it's going away everywhere. But as far as the communication language, let's talk a little bit about how you began, and kind of Angela touched a little bit on that herself. What made her, what motivated her, what drove her to children's lit. And I'll start this time with Patricia, so we don't have Andrea be always the first victim. We'll switch victims around. But Patricia, what drove you to children's lit? You talked a little bit about passing it on, but why children's books? Why not just other forms of writing? What drove you to that, and what prepared you for it as well? And how has that experience been? We'll put like the 2 questions that I had sent to you in one, because I think they kind of fit.
Sure. So I have been an elementary school teacher for 25 years. So obviously children's literature comes second nature to me in my classroom. I have an entire library at home of picture books that I adore and collect and enjoy. And I think that there's something really special about picture books and being able to convey a narrative and a story in such a simple way, but sometimes even more profound than a chapter book. and because you have to condense it, right? What started me, I've always enjoyed writing. What really started it, though, was my first book called My Crowning Glory, which was inspired by my daughter, who unfortunately experienced some bullying. And because of that, the book was inspired, and we're not here to talk about that book specifically, but the book was inspired by her. And from that, it stemmed into deciding to take on this project. I've always wanted to do something about Portugal, but have never quite had the courage. Yes, there's the cover of Portugal's Daughter. But as was mentioned by Angela, and you had said it as well, that there's not, I had seen that there's nothing that reflects me as a Portuguese immigrant in children's literature. There are, like you said, children's books from Portugal that we can have access to, but actual books that tell our narrative, which is different, because once you're caught, you're that third culture kid, right? You're not quite Portuguese, but you are, but then you're also Canadian or American, and you have this, kind of third culture. You're somewhere in between of that. And so I wanted to convey that in my book. This book is it's got kind of a dual narrative, because, and I guess we're probably going to touch on that in a little bit, but just to share just a brief snippet, that it follows the storyline of a father and daughter throughout her life, achieving the different milestones, and him speaking victory into her life and uplifting her. And you see, her getting older and him getting older, and we can talk a little more about that in a little bit. But it also celebrates Portuguese culture in a way that was so intentional. There are over 115 cultural references in these, 13 little spreads that share all across Portugal, the islands, the mainland, other Portuguese-speaking countries. And so it was something as a way for me to give back to my beautiful heritage that I am so honored and privileged to be a part of, and for people to really, hopefully through my little book, be able to see, wow, this is a really beautiful, like Portugal is really popular right now as a hot spot for vacations and whatnot, but to see the richness of our culture and the depth of our culture. There's, references to literature in there, and the arts and food and all of it. And to be able to capture that, my illustrator captured that in such a brilliant way. And we were given a bit of funding from the Ministerio de Cultura, from the government, the Department of Arts and Culture. Sorry, the words weren't coming.
Right. Yeah.
I was trying to think in Portuguese and English there for a hot second. And so that was brilliant to help, as long as we used Portuguese talent for the book. So it's been a brilliant journey. And this little book is really has been a real heart project.
Indeed, yeah, I think children's lit, first and foremost, are the projects of the heart, at least in the beginning, and then sometimes people get, of course, a little bit carried away, but indeed. And of course, being an elementary school teacher, you did that help in not only knowing the lit, from teaching it, from having it, and making it accessible to your students, but also from what to look for, because sometimes people think, well, I'll just write a book, for children. I'll just use simple words. It's not that simple. It's a genre all to itself.
And creating that story arc that is engaging to your audience, and finding that depth, depending on the kind of book that you write. There's all different kinds, obviously.
Sure.
So, after reading hundreds and hundreds of picture books with classes, over the years, you kind of, what students like and what they don't like. And I've had all age groups. I've been blessed with that. So that has been really helpful in creating these narratives.
Thank you. Julie, what got you started in children's lit?
Well, writing has always been my favorite expressive outlet ever since a child. I was a shy little girl in school. I started writing little silly stories for my friends, and I got their attention. Writing for children, I just love the audience. I love seeing them engaged in a book. It wasn't something I really wanted to start with. I wanted to write long novels, but publishing was always a dream for me, because almost a fantasy. Because life, I wrote through as a child, through high school, into adulthood, but I got married young. I started a family very young, and my priorities in life at that time were, my children, my family. Writing was always in the background. It was something that I wanted to do. I wanted to write a book, and it wasn't until 2020 did I finally realize, now I have to make this a reality. So I wanted to start small, and I decided, okay, I'm going to I enrolled in an online course, a free course, and I studied, and it wasn't a free course. They were going to charge me later for publishing, and very expensive. So I took notes, and I was determined to do it myself. I got an editor that I found online, an illustrator. I've been very lucky. I found really great, talented people to bring my stories to life. And after I wrote my first book, Nina and I, there was a sense of accomplishment. Okay, I did it. But, I got addicted. I want to write more. Reading to the children, seeing the kids holding the book in their hands, it was just addictive. And I soon, in 2022, I wrote, Nina and I came out in 2021. The Hat in the Closet came out in 2023. And I'm now currently working on my first bilingual Portuguese book that I'm very, very excited about. I just sent it to the editor. It's entitled, What is Saudade? And it's all my books are based on my childhood experiences, but this one is very special to me. And it's about a little girl going to visit the island of her parents' birthplace, which is in the Azores. I don't specifically say it's Terceira, but there's a lot of clues in the story that will clue you in that it is Terceira. But I'm really, really excited about writing this book. Like when I was growing up, there were no books about Portugal. Mm-hmm. I looked, but it was very upsetting to me. And, when I went to the Azores, there were some books, but I couldn't read them very well. But I always wanted to write a book about my culture and to showcase it, because, growing up in Santa Cruz, and it's a beach town, the Portuguese community is not very big. I had a group of friends. Where are you going this summer? I'm going to the Azores. And they would look at me, where is that? And I just felt, at the same time, I felt honored and lucky to know about my ancestry and to know about the Azores. Although many people didn't know about it, I felt like it was a special thing. It was like I had the best of both worlds. I had the Azores and California. And, but I really want to showcase my culture, and I'm really, really excited about this third book. And thank you, Denise, because when you contacted me, I was thinking about, I was just starting to get serious about writing it. And I just submitted it to my editor a few days ago. So you were the push.
Well,
Get
okay,
it
well,
done.
that's
So
great.
I want
That's
to thank you.
fantastic. And when it comes out, we'll bring you back so we can talk about it,
Oh,
obviously.
yeah.
Angela, you kind of alluded a little bit to it, but what drove you to this genre? You've said a little bit
Mhm.
before, but once you got in, how comfortable you are at it now, or is it, I mean, I think with books and music or any of the creative arts, even though one feels comfortable, it's always like the first time. There's always, the nervousness of something coming out of, does it have this, does it have that, and so tell us a little bit about the process that got you into it and what, and like you said, there was a reason why you wrote the first two, but then why these other themes that you're going through, that you've published in the last few years and some future projects as well.
Sure. So when I first had the idea to write the book, I think it may have been you, Denise. I actually can't remember, that suggested I work with the Portuguese Heritage
I'm not taking blame for
Publications.
all of it.
No.
I've already taken it for Julie. I'm not taking the blame for everybody.
Portuguese Heritage Publications of California, which was an organization that had existed, and they, with the sole purpose of publishing books by Portuguese-American authors, and specifically in California, they started publishing sort of documentary, like really big documentary books to document the history of the community here, but then also started publishing independent authors who were writing stories about their grandmother or things like that. And so that was a really great learning process, because the very first book was a board book, so a small cardboard book that you would give an infant or someone that's 2 or 3 years old. And through that process, learned about the importance of translation and getting your translation right, and also the publishing, the laying out the book process. Luckily to have been introduced to Angela Lanes, who has been phenomenal to work with. She's also Portuguese, so. And then the illustrations done by Elia Borges Souza, who another good friend. But I like the idea that the book is put together by Portuguese women, so it's another kind of thing that I'm proud of with the books. And to go through a printer, you have to order a run, which means I've got 5,000 books sitting in my shed in the backyard at some point. And whenever somebody ordered one, I had to mail it out, and I realized that very quickly that's not what I wanted to do, because it got very tedious mailing out the books. And I came across a couple of videos about self-publishing, and that Amazon had a print-on-demand service. And so that's sort of been the route that I've gone with the subsequent books. So the books are a little bit bigger. And I will say kind of what kept me going is, again, once you publish one, then your mind just starts to go, and well, what if I did a book about, like educational books, so learning colors and learning numbers. And so we did Números, Cores e Fruta, right? And then I started looking for a book. Well, I wonder if there's a book about the Gala Barcelos, because we've all got roosters all over our house, and we know versions of the story, but I wonder if there's an actual book. I looked everywhere and I couldn't find one. Like, I couldn't even find one in Portuguese, just Portuguese. So there was an opportunity to write that one. And I have to actually give credit to my mother for that one too, because she was a teacher for 45 years. She taught 3rd grade. And in one of her international units, she actually had written out the story of the Gala Barcelos in English, but she had written it out and actually had sketched out her own little illustration. So that served as a sort of the idea generator and catalyst for that book. And then again, what I went to Festas growing up. How cool would it be for there to be a book about going to the Festa? When you were marching in the parade, you were carrying the flag, you were running in and out of the Chamarita, like, just, it was such a wonderful part of my childhood that I'm so happy. I think, I think it was, I can't remember if it was Julie or Patricia that said it, just so thankful to have had this identity to latch onto growing up, because I mean, you deal with a lot of things growing up, everything from being self-conscious to do you fit in school and who am I, right? And I always had, well, I'm Portuguese and I'm a queen on the weekends, and I'm, this is the food that we eat. And so it was always something that I was very, very proud of and really helped solidify my identity. But there was nothing that talked about my experience as a Portuguese-American child growing up in California. And so you just start like, we could write about this, we could write about this, and you could this, and then before you know it, it's like, right, and you've got a long list of topics that you want to write about. So, it's kind of become a passion project. I'm certainly not, buying a yacht or anything from the proceeds, but it's been such a lovely experience, and the feedback that I've gotten. And I will say, so there've been a couple of new versions of the book, because people buy them and then they give you feedback, and maybe even leave you reviews on Amazon. The illustrations were a little blah. Oh, okay, well, let's fix that, that kind of thing. And so the print on demand format has been great, because you're not stuck with 1,000 books that have blah illustrations, right? You can make an edit fairly quickly and upload and have it be a new version, and not be out a major amount of funds. So I would say anybody out there that's thinking about doing a book, and the print on demand and self-publish route is a really great way to go. I can't speak. I've never worked with besides the heritage publications, I've never worked with an agent. I've never, worked with an editor or anything like that. So I can't speak to that experience. But, our little team of me, Elia, and Angela has been great to get the books out, the ones that we have so far.
Well, we'll wait at least another year or two, and then I'm sure the yacht will be here
Right.
after the next 2 or 3 books.
Right.
And Andrea, the same question. So, how did you begin, and what has made you, what has driven you to keep on writing? Because I know you've done several.
Yeah. So writing has always been my creative outlet. So even in high school, I wrote poetry. That was my preferred writing style. And I would submit it to the literary magazine at school. And I was part of a poetry festival one year in high school. And I thought, this is so cool. Just seeing writers and different poets reading their work. I thought it was such a great experience. And of course, in the back of your head, you always have, if you enjoy writing, one day I would love to publish my own book, right? My poetry book. And of course, that stays behind in your mind. And when I met my husband, he is not Portuguese, he's Italian. So he didn't know the language. And all my grandparents speak Portuguese. So my grandparents in Portugal speak Portuguese. My grandmother here speaks Portuguese. So of course, I wanted to teach my husband how to communicate and for him to understand the language. And when I looked, similar to Angela, like there was not much. And I'll say I was even looking for children's books at that time to maybe help on a basic level. And I was finding a lot of Brazilian Portuguese books, which was great. It'll teach you the language, but there's some dialect differences and some words are different. So I remember saying back then, it would be so great one day to be able to have a children's book, and we didn't have children yet, to intertwine the languages. And because I liked poetry, the idea was always to create poems and verses that are rhythmic, to do it. But I had no experience with children at that point. So again, the idea, stays behind in your mind for maybe one day. And when my daughter was born, the following year, the pandemic hit and our flights to Portugal got canceled. And I was gutted. I was sad, I was angry, I was scared, right? When are we going to be able to meet grandma and grandpa? When are we going to get to have those experiences that I cherished growing up? I really wanted her to experience that. And the sad reality that I think probably struck a lot of people that year was time goes by quickly. And every time I would go to Portugal, I was not experiencing those same moments with the same people anymore. And again, that was scary. So I know sometimes they say that negative emotion ignites action, right? And usually ignites positive action for you to make a change or for you to do something. And so that negative emotion ignited me wanting to write Stella in the Villa as a poem for my daughter. And that was a way to place her in Vila Sueiro with my grandparents, feeding the chickens and petting the bunnies. I wanted to create that experience that year, and I wanted the experience to live forever. And so at first I wrote it one morning as a poem to her, again, to like thrust us into this experience that we couldn't physically have that year. And then by that afternoon, I'm like, how do I make this live forever? Because this piece of computer paper is going to get lost. It's going to fall under a couch. And then that's it. I'm publishing a book. And it was this like crazy blurt of an idea, which my husband is used to. And he was just like, sure, do it. And I had no idea how to start. Um, and so I also self-published like Angela, and I did a lot of research, and I got a team together, an editor and an illustrator, and it all happened really quickly. And it's funny how quickly it happened in hindsight compared to the books I've written after, because that one was just written with this burst of emotion, and it was quick, and it was just emotion flooding out. And the process went by very quickly as well. And I thought, it's a one-time deal, right? This is so great. There's a book in print. My daughter will have it forever. This is a legacy for her. And I never had a plan past that. And then my other grandma, now I have to even the playing field, right? I have to write another book for my other grandmother. And so that's when the second one came out. And again, there was still not too much thought past that of it becoming a series or it becoming more than just making each side of grandma and grandpa happy that everybody has a book. And so that was Stella in the kitchen, because I did a lot of baking with my grandmother here, and she made the biscoitos and the filhoses, and those were some of the memories I had. And then from there, it did get addicting, and it became a story. And I think seeing other people relate and have not only similar experiences themselves of visiting family in Portugal or having those same, that same nostalgia that I had, but also having the same want to pass that to their children and to pass the language. And so when I wrote the book, it was very intentional with trying to teach the language. I saw that my daughter, and even myself, we memorized songs. We were singing all the time. Songs just to us came so much easier to memorize, right? Than maybe, when you're studying in school, it's always easier to remember the song on the radio than the book you're supposed to be studying. So I wanted to keep the poetic form. I wanted to intertwine the words so that most of it is in English. And then either through the English words in the verse or through the context clues in the illustration, they could pick up the one or two words in the verse. And then as it becomes rhythmic, hopefully they could also add some memorization to that, and learn the words through reading. So that was how it all started. And I've got 3 books out so far. The 4th one is with the illustrator right now. And it's exciting. It's exciting to keep it going because it feels like you're leaving, not only are you leaving something behind for the generations to come, but you're pulling where you come from forward and not leaving that behind.
Fantastic. And we'll go around again to all 4 of you. And some of you have touched upon this, but obviously, you do it because it's a passion. All of you, Angela's the only one waiting for the yacht, but everybody else is doing it as a passion. But I'm being facetious, obviously. But with the passion, also the need to get the book out. Any writer wants readers. That's whether you're doing children's books or you're doing poetry, and we need to talk about that because you need to publish some of your poetry as well. We don't have enough poets in the Portuguese-American and Portuguese-Canadian world, unfortunately, especially writing in English. Most of them that have immigrated still write in Portuguese, which is great, but we don't have a lot of people doing the Portuguese-American experience from the first generation aspect. But and I'll start this time with Patricia. Patricia, and go around a little bit. How much of a task is it get readers, or do you have an outlet that you use, or how do you get your books out? Because we obviously all want people to read it, and especially children's book. It's important that we get it into more schools, more libraries, not necessarily just the Portuguese school down the block, or at the Portuguese club, but I'm talking about American and Canadian schools. And Canada, your country, has a bit more dedication to multiculturalism than ours has. I mean, we're finally getting there, but it's taken some time. And so tell us a little bit how your experience has been, and how you get your book out, and what you are going to do in the future in that aspect as well, if you have any plans.
So I just say though that I am so delighted to be in this space with 4 authors who are obviously kindred spirits, and that we are on such a similar journey. That's really brilliant. So the way that I share my book, obviously, social media is a big component that I'm sure that we all use to be able to share about the book. I also to play on the immigrant factor, not just the Portuguese factor, but also the immigrant factor, that when I'm sharing, if I'm invited to different schools to talk about this, I've done author visits where I've shared on a greater, because there's a lot of immigrants in Canada, right? And in the States as well. And so I often use that component and about being proud and about identity and what that looks like. And then, being an immigrant and how that's different in our households. So school visits also have been a big help. June is obviously, Portugal, a month that highlights Portugal Day and is very special. So that's a very busy month. Last year it was, and last year is when I published. This year is also going to be very busy with different events through different Portuguese venues, restaurants, cafes, and things where I'm going to be showcasing the book that way. So any place that shares our culture a little bit, I try to connect with them and share the book that way.
Indeed, and that's a great way to do it. And actually, I believe that the government of Portugal has an obligation, and I've written extensively about this. I haven't got anywhere, but I keep on trying, which is to have, and it's not, that we need a subsidy or a handout. It's that we need sometimes the contacts that can be done to get Portuguese authors, whether they be Portuguese authors that write in English, whether they be in the United States or Canada, at some of the book fairs. And sometimes it's hard for one author to get into the Los Angeles Book Fair, or so the Toronto Book Fair. But if that author is part of a group, of a national group of Portugal, so in other words, like Portugal last year was at the Miami Book Fair, and my criticism is, why not invite Portuguese-American authors to be at that book fair with the author from Portugal? Because then you have that institutional weight, whatever that is worth, but it is worth something, because you're talking about countries related with countries. Then having any of the 4 of you, or myself as a writer as well, with my little books going to a book fair, like the Los Angeles Book Fair, it won't happen, and it won't happen at these large venues. But Portugal can do a lot for us. So kudos to you for doing all that you're doing, and hopefully we can get more of this. And even collaboration between authors, as you were mentioning, but collaboration between the 4 of you and others who are doing children's literature. I'd love to, if I could get the funding, to put together a Portuguese children's book event at Fresno State, at California State University, Fresno. I'd love to do that with 5, 6, 10 authors, but obviously the funding needs to occur for that. And we have ways to help with once folks are here. It's just getting folks from different parts of the country here, because online is great, but I think maybe every 2 or 3 years, if all of you could get together, it certainly would be a plus, I believe, for you, and I believe for the communities. doing some event like that in a major community in the United States or Canada, where few can be invited, and doing it maybe again every 2 to 3 years would be a way to also connect with the American and the Canadian mainstream society, but also with our own community as well. Julie, how do you get your books out there also? What has been your experience? You started right in the middle of the pandemic. I mean, you talk about guts.
Well, writing, I have a stack of papers. At work I would write. After 26 years of working in county government, I was able to resign and spend more time on what I really wanted to achieve. But again, the priority wasn't there. But my son was in high school already, my youngest. So, he doesn't need me as much as he used to. And it was a little depressing. So that was like a kick in the pants to start doing something, start making the fantasy a reality. And it was a great experience, but self-promotion is so hard. I have trouble promoting myself. I use what I can. I use the internet, family and friends. I've sent my books to libraries all over California. I did get responses, and my book is in my local library here in Santa Cruz, Belton, Capitola, and a few other counties in the state. Word of mouth, but it would be great to have a community where you could, like you said, that you can work with, but self-promotion is hard. It's always been hard for me. It's difficult.
Sure. It is. It is not an easy task. Andrea.
Book reading at schools. I've done that. A few times, and it really refreshes you. I don't know. It's just the kids. I don't know. I get my energy from them, just seeing them light up and listen to my stories. I want to do more of that. I want to do more book readings and branch out.
Do you do it at libraries, at county libraries, city libraries?
I've done it at elementary schools and at a library. I just started. So the first time I was very, very nervous. I did it at a library. I don't know why I was nervous. My audience was a bunch of children under the age of 5. I guess I was more nervous.
That's a hard crowd sometimes.
Yeah, I was more nervous about the parents sitting there, but it was a very positive experience. And I just did another book reading at a book fair, Dr. Seuss book fair, a few months ago, and it was also a very positive experience. So I hope to do more of those in the future.
Fantastic. Andrea, how about you? How do you, what's been the driving force as far as promoting it and within and without and outside the community? Your book has that unique flavor of the Portuguese words, so I would think that it would be a plus for many who are in the community and like Julie said, and Patricia as well, I believe that libraries and schools are really a good setting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I echo that self-promotion is very hard. Um, it's gotten a little bit easier. With the first book, it was a lot of word of mouth. Even the second book, it was a lot of word of mouth that kind of got friends of friends, visiting the Instagram page and then purchasing the book. And so with that, it really was friends telling friends. Social media it's challenging because there's so much out there. And it's really having to find a way to be creative with how to promote the book. So that's been one angle. As that audience has grown slowly over time, that's an audience that when a new book comes out, they're there for me to announce it or to do something fun like a giveaway to hopefully get more eyes on the post. But with that, it's also been some school readings. This year, my daughter started pre-K, and she is the only Portuguese child in class. And I had donated a set of books to her school's library. And her teacher came up to me and was like, "Why didn't you tell me you were an author? I have to get you in to read." And of course, self-promotion is hard on a good day with a Portuguese audience. So to a non-Portuguese audience, I of course didn't think of promoting myself there because, the book it has Portuguese. Would they understand it? And so I actually did that a few weeks ago. Of course, reading in front of my daughter, let me tell you, that is a tough critic. So I was nervous for that reading, but it was fantastic. And the kids in class, because of the context clues and the teacher understood the words. We kind of played a guessing game. What word is on the page? And it kind of lit the light bulb that you can do this with an audience that's not Portuguese, right? Like mentioned by Patricia, it's about that, there's special moments and experiences. There's a different experience to being an immigrant. And even when you're speaking to a non-immigrant audience, there's still a special it's just a special experience to be able to spread a different culture and to teach them new words, right? That's fun. And so that was pretty exciting. That opened up a new perspective on school visits. Um, and then with that, it really is seeing who we can connect with organizationally. Denise, you mentioned the Portuguese government. I would love to know how to connect there because I think we're doing great work here. I think we are really bringing traditions that I've spoken to family and friends in Portugal, and some of the children there don't fully know about the Galo de Barcelos, right? Because we're holding on to that as such a special and unique piece to us. And for some there, it might just be everyday life, right? And so we really are doing such great work bringing it not only across the ocean, but like continuing to bring it through the generations here.
Yeah, indeed. And you mentioned the Galo de Barcelos. I just had a student who returned from Portugal last year, and he took one of my classes, and then he took a lit class from me, and he said, "Do you know that all of my relatives in northern Portugal, not a single one has a Galo de Barcelos in their house?" I said, "None of mine either," and it's not something that, because again, we hold on to things that and we have that classic example in the Portuguese festas that Angela mentioned and has a book about it, tied to the Azores. They've all died in mainland Portugal, the festas do Espírito Santo, and that's where they began, and that's where they were all over. And yet they continued in the Azores because of that distance, that things were preserved in that group of islands, and indeed in the communities in the diaspora. We preserve things that Portugal moves on because societies move on, and it just happens with all cultures. Obviously, it happens with our Armenian friends who celebrate things that Armenia no longer celebrates. So it's kind of a worldwide phenomenon. Angela, promoting, and I was kind of looking at you when I was listening to everybody because I could see your wheels turning already. So promoting is your game, of course. It's what you do professionally, as far as not just with your books, but as I said, professionally has been a very successful career. Tell us your thoughts and also what you've heard from Andrea, Julie, and Patricia, and what are some of your thoughts, and kind of to summarize everything that we've said.
Sure. Well, we've talked about this in the past, Anish, and we gave ourselves another thing to do. We haven't really done it yet, but I think this conversation just reinforces the need for some sort of resource or collective body that helps to promote Portuguese authors, right? Not just children's book authors, but Portuguese authors, poets, whether it's Portuguese-American, Portuguese-Canadian, helping to get the word out. But agree that promoting takes time, and it's not the easiest thing to do. For me personally, I've relied heavily on social media. Since public relations is my profession, I also know about things like the Newswire, where you can publish a press release on a Newswire, and it pushes out your news announcement to lots of different online publications, and you can even target people that cover children's literature. but those are paid services, and they are not cheap, right? So it can run anywhere from $600 to $2,000, depending on how long your press release is, if you want to include a picture or a video or anything like that. So, I mean, there's cost involved with things like that. There's also, trying to look up people who cover children's literature. Again, if you don't subscribe to a service, that's going to take a lot of time to do. It's not impossible, but you can send your book to people that review children's literature or mommy blogs, and I've done that. I've donated a lot of books to Portuguese schools, local Portuguese schools. So just put out there on Facebook, hey, any school or church or club that wants a book, happy to donate. Just send me your address and pay for shipping, and that's it. So I've donated a lot of those. And I've gone to a couple of the Dia de Portugal festival here in San Jose. I've gone to that a couple of times. There's been a holiday boutique in Newark Pavilion. I've had a booth there a couple of times. But again, the time factor, I just don't have time to have a booth at every single festival or every single festa, so, which is really what I should be doing if I wanted to sell mass amounts. But yeah, word of mouth would be great. And it's funny, when I don't know that people really know the power of a review on Amazon, or even on a Facebook page if you follow us on Facebook. But writing a review, giving a rating wherever you have purchased the book actually goes really far, because the way the search algorithms work is, if somebody just types in Portuguese children's book, the algorithm is going to surface the books that have the highest ratings. And if we have no ratings, if we have no reviews, unless you're searching for our title specifically, it may take you a long time to find our book. So having reviews is really, really important. So if you like one of the books that you've bought recently, please take another 2 minutes to leave a review, because it really, 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 really helps. Gosh, I mean, there's also so many other things that we could be talking about that we could do more of these webinars where we could do virtual readings. There's lots of things. I haven't really done readings for kids yet, like group readings. I've done a couple, but again, it's a time thing. But as everyone was talking, it did remind me of, and I think it was Andrea, you said it, that, this isn't just for the Portuguese community. So at our daughter's old school, we started a Portuguese club, and there were 3 kids in the entire school that were Portuguese, but we just thought, hey, we're going to start it. And consistently, we had like 22 kids every month for the Portuguese club meeting. They loved it, right? It was something for them to do. They were learning new words. Of course, having some treats at the end was certainly, an incentive for the kids to go. But, they loved it. And at the end of the year, when, we put out a little survey to the kids, what did you like best? And what do you want to do more of? And they all said, we loved learning words. We loved learning like the vocabulary or learning a song. So they like the learning part, right? So I think we sometimes underestimate what kids are looking for. And that was a young age. I was elementary school, so I think there's still a lot that can be done. Yeah.
Well, we have come upon our hour. I thank you all. We could continue on brainstorming, and I think that maybe we should. Maybe we could all, in the near future, have kind of a closed session to brainstorm a little bit about a couple of different things that could be beneficial to all of you. Certainly, the Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute at Fresno State is willing to help, all we do, of course, is try to promote everything that is Portuguese and archive it, such as this webinar will be archived in our oral history program, which we are delighted to put these conversations on there, because we all know that our diaspora is going to be different 25, 30 years from now, such as it was different 25, 30 years ago. And so we archive these at our Oral History Project at Fresno State as a way to give future researchers an eye into today's community. Maybe when a young researcher will be focusing on the Portuguese-American or the Portuguese-Canadian experience 35, 40, 50, even 100 years from now, they'll have these archives at our university. I thank all of you for attending, for being here, for sharing your stories, for talking about your books. I hope that we can entice the community to keep on purchasing your books, to buy more of your books, to discuss your books, to have them present in community events. I find it, and Angela touched upon the Dia de Portugal events, it's just Patricia as well. Those are important events, and those because they have different things going on. I find that it's at a traditional, and this is what I've been told by folks who have done this. I haven't done it personally for our Bruma publications at Fresno State, because I don't even have time. I don't even dream about going to all the different festivals with books. But I find that, or folks have told me, that if it's like a Dia de Portugal, a heritage event, then people are looking for things like that. If it's like at a Romaria or a Sopas, they want to dance a vida and the chamarita, and they want to have the bifan and the prego and the Sopas, and they don't want to, and because it's a different audience, and they're not there for that. But that's something that maybe in the future we could plant within our Portuguese-American and Portuguese-Canadian organizations, to have maybe a little bit of a book section within their own event, and create that culture, because right now there isn't that culture. And it's happened in the past with authors of all kinds of literature that have gone to these events, and they were lucky, in the events, and I'm talking about events with 10,000 people, they were lucky to sell 2 books, and it's just, there was a lot of input for very little output. And so it is an ongoing thing that I think we need to, as far as the Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute at Fresno State, California State University, Fresno, we're here to help any way we can, and with PALCUS, I'm sure, as well. And so let's keep this conversation going. Best of luck to all of you. Keep on writing, please. And Andrea, we need to talk about your poetry as well. And Julie, thank you so much. Hope and looking forward to the next book. We can certainly do a session on it as well. Patricia, best of luck to you. Thank you for your book. I am going to try to get it as soon as possible. And Angela, of course, will be in touch, as we always are, through PALCUS and all the other events. Thank you all.
Yep.
Happy Children's National Children Literatures Week for everyone here in the United States. And of course, it is always a wonderful time to talk about your books. Best of luck, and thank you for your writing above all.
Thank you, Denise. Thanks for
Muito
hosting.
Obrigado.
Nice
Obrigado.
Nice
Appreciate it.
meeting you
Obrigado.
all.
Oh,
Até sempre.
dear.